Hey everybody, welcome. We're live doing a read through here in Dialectics Hour of Capital Volume 1. And today um, we're doing still the commodity chapter, section 3, the value form or exchange value. Now, this chapter is pretty long, so I want to try to limit these sessions to somewhere in the ballpark of an hour. So, since I'm going to be going slowly and line by line, it's possible that, we don't get through the whole section today, in which case we'll just split it up into two, but we'll have to see exactly how that goes. So starting next Tuesday, we'll either be continuing with section 3 of the commodity chapter, or we'll be jumping to section 4, which is the fetishism, the commodity fetishism and reification stuff, which would be really interesting. I was actually just rereading that yesterday. So let me go ahead and pull up the text here. Oh, here it is, ready to go. All right. Okay. The value form or exchange value. Commodities come into the world in the form of use values or material goods, such as iron, linen, corn, etc. This is their plain, homely, natural form. However, they are only commodities because they have a dual nature, because they are at the same time objects of utility and bearers of value. Therefore, they only appear as commodities or have the form of commodities insofar as they possess a double form, that is, a natural form and a value form. Okay, so let's break this down. Hold on, I'm making sure I can see the chat all right. All right. So I'm going to pull up the German text here and see what's going on. So something that I've been pointing out and tracking in Capital here is Marx's use of the word Erscheinung, which has to do with a way a grounded appearance. So remember we talked about the appearance being the first category of capital, and appearance being that something that wealth takes on the form of appearing in the form of commodity. And so here Marx is really restating something that we've been talking about throughout this essay. So commodities have this material or natural side. These use values are grounded in the physical properties of the thing. And then on the other side, for these things to be commodities, they have to have this dual nature of being both objects of utility, both things that satisfy a human need or a want, that have some use, and also bearers of value. That is, things that are worth something in relation to other things. Therefore, they only appear as commodities or have the form of commodities, right? So here we have an equivocation or a linkage between the idea of something appearing or something having a commodity form, insofar as they possess a double form, that is a natural form and a value form. Now, the German word here is just Form, F-O-R-M. Yet, there might be words like Gestalt as well in this analysis later, which would be like shape or something like that. So we have two forms. There'll be, form is related to the concept of content usually within dialectical philosophy. There's a dialectical form and content, right? Where you think about a work of art. A work of art has a form, but it also perhaps has a meaning, right? That would be the content that's displayed in a certain form, right? But the form and content are always kind of passing over into each other at the same time. So yeah, let's go on from here. The objectivity of commodities, Wertgegenständlichkeit is the of the word here. Okay, so the objectivity of commodities is values. So here, what's literally said in German is die Wertgegenständlichkeit, so the value objectivity of commodities. Differs from Dame quickly. Oh yeah, in the sense that a man knows not where to have it. Yeah. So I believe this is a dirty joke that Marx is making here. Let's see if I have a note in my copy. I don't, but there's a footnote here to Shakespeare. Hold on a second, making sure everything's going all right with the. I believe this is a dirty joke that Marx is making. Okay, yeah, sorry. Falstaff. I forget what play this is. Oh, it's Henry the Fourth. Why, she's neither fish nor flesh. A man knows not where to have her. Dame quickly. Thou art an unjust man in saying so. Thou or any man knows where to have me, thou knave thou. So I don't know, like I think he's talking about like fucking mermaids, right? You know, Marx, witty dude, dirty sense of humor, cracking jokes with the young Hegelians at what was it, Hempel's Wine Bar, I think the name of it was. Okay, so differs from Dame Quickly in the sense that a man knows not where to have it. Not an atom of matter enters into the objectivity of commodities as values. So here we have that word that the objectivity as value of commodities as values is again rendering this Wertgegenständlichkeit der Waren, so the value objectivity of commodities. And so here he's saying that like unlike Dame Quickly, where one knows very well where to have it, there's something mysterious about commodities. They're teasing us because we can't actually see them as values in terms of their atomic structure or their physical structure, because value is ultimately a relation. In this, it is the direct opposite of the coarsely sensuous objectivity of commodities as physical objects. It's interesting here that it says direct opposite too, right? Because then you think about this, there's a dialectical point of tension if something is in opposition as opposed to just being different. Um, and so here, again, sorry, I'm checking where the direct opposite word is. Oh, it's in the same sentence. Yeah, so just im geraden Gegenteil. So opposite. We may twist and turn a single commodity as we wish. It remains impossible to grasp the thing as a thing possessing value. So you can't physically inspect for value. It's not physically present on the commodity. However, let us remember that commodities possess an objective character as values. So then again, this is Wertgegenständlichkeit, value objectivity. Only insofar as they are all expressions of an identical social substance, human labor. That their objective character as values is therefore purely social. From this, it follows self-evidently that it can only appear in the social relation between commodity and commodity. Okay, so let's start back here. Okay. So commodities have this value objectivity. And what gives them that value objectivity is not any physical property that they have, but they are all expressions. Ausdrücke is the German word here. Expression as the synonym for like a figure of speech is an expression, literally to press out. So of an identical social substance. So here it's not identical is a little bit strong. So it's sofern sie Ausdrücke derselben gesellschaftlichen Einheit So Einheit here is not quite substance. Substance would be Substanz in German. Einheit is like unity or oneness, like the unity of opposites, Einheit, right? Um, so that might be where they're getting the identical, but it's literally more like the same social unity. Human labor. So what gives commodity their objective character is that they're all expressions. They're all something that's been externalized or pressed out of human labor working, right? And so, the objectivity can't be found in the commodity, but there is something objective about the labor time that's been used to make that commodity, right? That's something that varies based on social conditions and the means of production and things like this. But human labor can be measured in terms of its quantity, in terms of its intensity, in terms of its like technical ability and things like this. And so, value, as rooted in human socially less necessary labor time of human labor, is an objective. Is objective, even though it's not physical. Their objective characters, values, is therefore purely social. So it's a socially constituted objectivity. From this, it follows self-evidently that it can only appear. So then let's look at this word here. Yeah, Erscheinen again, right? So that's that word for appearance. That means I was thinking about some like metaphors to express this, but like when a book appears in print, right? The book does not seem to be in print, right? But it's making its appearance in print. When someone appears on a show, right? Like they've made their appearance. When a movie or appears on DVD or something like that, right? Like it's like in that particular form. So that's one way to think about this word appearance here. So because value is purely social, Marx says it follows self-evidently that it can only appear, value can only appear in the social relation between commodity and commodity. Social relation between two things being traded with each other. In fact, we started from exchange value, or the exchange relation of commodities, in order to track down the value that lay hidden within it. Remember that? That was in the first section of this chapter. We must now return to this form of appearance, the Erscheinungsform of value. And ultimately, that's the form of appearance is, or Erscheinungsform, appearance form, is exchange value. Exchange value is the way that value shows itself, because value has to take on it. Hegel has that line: essence must appear. Value must, just like a show must appear on screen, right? Value must appear in exchange. Okay. Everyone knows, if nothing else, that commodities have a common value form, which contrasts in the most striking manner with the motley natural forms of their use values. I refer to the money form. So that's the common value form, is the money form. Now, however, we have to perform a task never even attempted by bourgeois economics. That is, we have to show the origin of this money form. We have to trace the development of the expression of value contained in the value relation of commodities from its simplest, almost imperceptible outline to the dazzling money form. When this has been done, the mystery of money will immediately disappear. So what Marx is saying is like, bourgeois economics can't give an account of money. Marx is going to give that account. Marx is going to explain what money is and how money arises. And this is something that he's able to do with the help of Hegelian dialectics, as we'll see. And when he says the origin of this money form, so let's see what that is here in German. So it's Entstehung, which is not necessarily origin in like a historical sense. Let me see yeah. So emergence, arise, originate, develop, right? So like literally like to stand, like to step out into emergence. But I don't think that this is historical. Like he's not talking about the where the money like first came from, although that would be something that um, is implicit as an account. But it's more origin in the sense of what's the logical basis behind money. Like what are the fundamental things beneath it that give rise to something like money. The development of the expression value. So that's just Wertausdrucks, so same word as expression earlier, containing the value relation of commodities from its simplest, almost imperceptible outline. I wonder what outline is here. Okay. So imperceptible here is unscheinbarsten. So it's like rooted in the like it's like barely even like seeming or barely even showing. This is where shine can be a relation. Can also be a translation of shine, which is to seem. Um, but outline here is Gestalt, not you know like, I guess like Grundrisse would be a word you could use for outline or different forms of the word riss. Um, but we're talking about here this move from this simple abstract set of relations to the more complex money form as the higher level of relation that's built upon that in layers. And then once this entire dialectical analysis has been presented, money will no longer be something mysterious. And I think that this is really quite interesting. What goes on in this chapter and in the money chapters. There's lots of like debates you can have about it, especially given the weirdness of modern money and like dollar dominance and stuff like that. Okay. The simplest value relation is evidently that of one commodity to another commodity of a different kind. It does not matter which one. So this would be a barter relationship, trading one thing for another thing. Hence, the relation between the values of two commodities supplies us with the simplest expression of the value of a single commodity. Okay, so now we're going to go through like different dialectical layers, beginning with the most simple, which is this simple, isolated, or accidental form of value. And then form of value here is weird how the translator does this. So it's just that form, which is the same thing that's translated as the value form earlier. So this would be value form, right? When people talk about the value form, they mean this. Okay. Simple, isolated, or accidental form of value. What's that? Okay, it's X commodity A equals Y commodity B, or X commodity A is worth Y commodity B. For example, 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat. So one thing is equated, a certain amount of one thing is equated for a certain amount of another thing. Now, one thing I noticed that's very interesting last discussion is that I happened to Google how much, or was it 10 yards of linen cost, and it was $30 on Amazon, and then the one coat was $60 or something like that. So it was actually pretty close to each other, close to what it is in Marx's thing. Okay. The two poles of the expression of value, the relative form of value, and the equivalent form. So now we got some new terminology. The relative form and the equivalent form. Those are the two sides. Let me pause for a second. I'm just going to get some water real quick so that my voice doesn't give out. All right, I'm back. Okay. The whole mystery of the form of value lies hidden in this simple form. That is this
simple isolated form. Or the whole mystery of the value form, if we want to use more conventional Marxist terminology. Our real difficulty, therefore, is to analyze it. Here, two different kinds of commodities, in our example, the linen and the coat, evidently play two different parts. So here's the claim. When we equate these two things together, they stand in different positions in relation to each other. So it's not just that these are equal. It's not just that A equals B. It's that A equals B, but A stands in a different kind of relationship to B. You might say, if you were to use like older logical terminology that you might find in someone like Hegel, that A stands in the relationship of a subject and B a predicate. Where B equals A, right? Like, so like from a very formal logical perspective, A equals B and B equals A are the same thing. But Marx is identifying that there's different roles played by each. So to say that A equals B, or say A equals 10B, is to measure A in a certain amount of B. But to say, you know, like 0.1B or point 0.1B is equal to 10A or 1A, right, or something like that. The opposite is to measure in a different way. I think I mixed that up in my head, but all right. So to say 20 yards of linen can be measured in one coat is different than saying that one coat is worth 20 yards of linen if we're thinking about these things as playing different parts on different sides of this equation. So the linen expresses its value in the coat. The coat serves as the material in which that value is expressed. Right? So we're measuring linen in a certain amount of coat. The first commodity plays an active role, the second a passive one. Right, you see? It matters what is standing in the kind of, you know, to use different language, a subject position versus a predicate position. Or the relative form versus the equivalent form. Yeah, and so here he says the value of the first commodity is represented as the relative value. That would be the 20 yards of linen. In other words, the commodity is in the relative form of value. The relative Wertform. So that would be, or the relative value form. The second commodity fills the function of equivalent. In other words, it is in the equivalent form. So we're saying like this, the relative form, is equivalent to one coat, and the one coat that is in the equivalent form. The relative form of value and the equivalent form are two inseparable moments, which belong to and mutually condition each other. So there's a reciprocity here. But at the same time, they are mutually exclusive or opposed extremes. That is, poles of the expression of value. Right? So we have an opposition here. The things are being equated with each other. They're being unified by virtue of them being opposed and being different. Now remember last time Marx talked about how you can only have exchange value if you're trading different commodities. So there has to be an opposition in order for things to express value in one another. They are always divided up between the different commodities brought into relation with each other by that expression. I cannot, for example, express the value of linen in linen, right? So that's the move here. To understand how much the linen is worth, I have to express it in terms of an equivalent form, an equivalent commodity. I can't say that it's worth linen. It has to be some other thing that I'm measuring it in. Any other commodity, right? 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen is not an expression of value, right? That tells us nothing. So notice here, it's not just like mathematical, like algebraic equivalence here. It's logic. It's logical, right? This is a tautology. And so there's nothing said in it, right? The equation states rather on the contrary, 20 yards of linen are nothing but 20 yards of linen. A definite quantity of linen considered as an object of utility. So he says then it's just a use value. 20 yards of linen, that's just linen, right? Like if you say like, money, that's just pieces of paper, right? In a way, you've reduced money to its use value. But you're not recognizing what money, is in social terms at that point. Yeah, Marx has an interesting take on the ontological argument. I'm not sure if I can talk about it fully from memory, but where Kant has that critique of the ontological argument for God's existence, where he says, 100 real thalers is the same as the same amount of money as is imaginary thalers, and Marx says something along the lines of like, yeah, well that's thalers is money that's socially constituted, and gods in a certain way are like only hold currency in certain societies and things like that. It's an interesting little take on that. But here, we can't have a tautological relationship and really find out anything about the linen at that point. The value of the linen can therefore only be expressed relatively, i.e., in another commodity, right? So that's why they call it the relative form. So this is related to something else. The relative value form of the linen therefore presupposes that some other commodity confronts it in the equivalent form. We talked about that confronting. The commodities need to like stand opposed to each other in order for us to figure out what they're worth. On the other hand, this other commodity, which figures as the equivalent, cannot simultaneously be in the relative form of value. It is not the latter commodity whose value is being expressed. It only provides the material in which the value of the first commodity is expressed. So what he's saying here is that when I say 20 coats is worth 20 Lenin is worth 1 coat. Also, happy birthday, Vladimir Lenin. We're talking about Lenin, his birthday, so very appropriate, but Lenin in a different sense. The value of the coat doesn't appear when it's expressing the value of the linen. It's this material, it's this content that expresses value. And there's that word expression again. Of course, the expression 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat, also includes its converse. 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen, or the 1 coat is worth 20 yards of linen. So, yes, there is this reverse equation. But in this case, I must reverse the equation in order to express the value of the coat relatively. And if I do that, then the linen becomes the equivalent instead of the coat. So they can be flipped around. But once you flip them around, you're seeing something different now. Now you're not measuring coats, now you're not measuring linen, you're measuring coats. And if I do that, the linen becomes the equivalent instead of the coats. The same commodity cannot, therefore, simultaneously appear in both forms in the same expression of value. So that's the basic takeaway from this. One has to be in the equivalent form, and one has to be in the relative form. You can flip them, but they can't be in both sides at the same time. These forms rather exclude each other as polar opposites, right? So we have an opposition here, a dialectical opposition. Okay, the word opposite actually doesn't appear here. It's die schließen sich viel mehr als Pole aus. So ausschließen, sorry, is to exclude, and then ausschließen sich is like to like exclude, like it's like reflexive at that point, but here it's like each other. Als pola, so as like polar opposites in this sense. Whether a commodity is in the relative form or in its opposite, the equivalent form, and so here it is like opposite. It's entgegen gesetzt. It's opposed. It's a verb in German here, but the equivalent form entirely depends on its actual position in the expression of value. So there is an expression of value, and there's a difference in position of the commodities expressing value in each other. That is, it depends on whether it is the commodity whose value is being expressed or the commodity in which value is being expressed. Right? I think this all makes sense if you think about it. Right? Like, if I had a Charizard, I could think, say, like, that could get me this many Pikachus. Right? But you could also think about, I have all my Pikachu cards, and how many, save them up and get a Charizard, right? There's a difference in the two ways of looking at the same thing. You knew Pokemon examples were coming, right? Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. I think it is like fairly straightforward, but it does help to really go slowly through it and think through it, especially if we're trying to think about the logic of his categories. And so now Marx is going to break it down. He's going to talk about the relative form and the equivalent form in detail. Trying to think about how far we can go in this analysis today. All right. Let's jump into the relative form value. The content of the relative form value, or the relative value form. In order to find out how the simple expression of the value of a commodity lies hidden in the value relation between two commodities, we must first of all consider the value relation quite independently of its quantitative aspect. So we're going to remove the amounts here. The usual mode of procedure is the precise opposite of this. Nothing is seen in the value relation but the proportion in which definite quantities of two sorts of commodity count as equal to each other. It is overlooked that the magnitudes of different things only become comparable in quantitative terms when they have been reduced to the same unit. Only as expressions of the same unit do they have a common denominator and are therefore commensurable magnitudes. There's a note about the economist here. I'm not going to go through it because I don't know enough about the details to fill it in. Let's see if the explanation here clarifies this a bit more. Whether 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat or 20 coats equal X coats, i.e. whether a given quantity of the linen is worth few or many quotes, is always implied whatever the proportion, it is always implied whatever the proportion of the linen and the coat as magnitudes of value are expressions of the same unit, things of the same nature. Linen equals coat is the basis of the equation. So the common denominator here, I would assume, would be something like socially necessary labor times that he's talking about. But these two qualitatively equated commodities do not play the same part. It is only the value of the linen that is expressed. And how? By being related to the quote as its equivalent, or the thing exchangeable with it. In this relation, the quote counts as the form of existence of value, as the material embodiment of value, for it is only as such that it is the same as the linen. Hold on a second. Okay. All right, so this is the existence form. And when linen is being traded for a coat, the coat counts as the form of existence of value. Value is existing in the form of coat. It's a material embodiment of the value, for only as such as it is the same as the linen. So when we're trading them, we're not trading them as use values, right? We're trading them as values, as the material embodiment of a certain amount of ultimately labor time, right? On the other hand, the linen's own existence as value comes into view or receives an independent expression, for it is only as value that it can be related to the coat as being equal in value to it or exchangeable with it. Right? So for these things to be related to each other, this can only be insofar as they are both values. In the same way, butyric acid is a different substance from propyl formate, yet both are made up of the same chemical substances, carbon C, hydrogen H, and oxygen O. Moreover, these substances are combined together in the same proportions in each case, namely C4H8O2. Now, if butyric acid were to be equated with propyl formate, then in the first place, propyl formate would count only in the relation, count in this relation only as a form of the existence of C4H8O2. In the second place, it would thereby be asserted that butyric acid also consists of C4H8O2. Thus, by equating the propyl formate with butyric acid, one would be expressing their chemical composition as opposed to their physical formation. So that's, that just solves it right there. Pretty self-explanatory, right? If anyone wants to give their thoughts on this in the comments, please do so. I never took a, chemistry class. I don't know much about chemistry. I'm sure I'll look up this example at one point, but, I just remember us fretting over this during a Capital Reading Group a little while ago. But the idea is like the chemical composition differs from their physical formation, but these things are different, but they're being equated insofar as they contain the same, I guess, chemical makeup, but have different forms, different structures. And so Marx is saying in a similar way, these have value that's being equated with them, but have different material forms, different use values. If we say that as values, commodities are simply congealed quantities of human labor, our analysis reduces them, it is true, to the level of abstract value, but it does not give them a form of value distinct from their natural forms. So to say, oh, they're values because they're simply congealed, so they contain human labor, right? Then they are abstract values, but they don't have a value form. There's no way to express that in something. It is otherwise in the value relation of one commodity to another, right? So that's what lets us see and measure and express the value that these things have abstractly. The first commodity's value character emerges here through its own relation to the second commodity. So I say 1 coat equals 10 linen or 20 linen. Now the value of that coat has emerged in terms of something opposite to it, something different than it. By equating, for example, the coat as a thing of value to the linen, we equate the labor embedded in the coat with the labor embedded in the linen. This is important. So when I say this coat is worth this much linen, I'm saying that the labor in the coat, the amount of labor in it, type of labor, all that, is equivalent to the labor in this much linen. That's the argument. Now, it is true that the tailoring which makes up the coat is a concrete labor of a different sort from the weaving which makes the linen, right? Different types of concrete labor. But the act of equating tailoring and the weaving reduces the former, in fact, to what is really equal in two kinds of labor, to the characteristic that they have in common of being human labor. So that's the real abstraction that takes place when these two things are made equivalent to each other, is that insofar as we're in valuing them, we're equating the labor in one with the labor in another. We're not looking at the specific kind of labor, but that they both abstractly contain human labor. This is a roundabout way of saying that weaving, too, insofar as it weaves value, has nothing to distinguish it from tailoring, and consequently is abstract human labor, right? So weaving, weaves linen, but at a different level, at an abstract level, it's just weaving value. Just like making coats, you're just making value, right? When you work, you're just adding value. When you're a fucking barista working at Starbucks, you're adding value to that process. And if you don't believe me and you don't buy buy into the barista nonsense, you need to read Cheng Fu, one of the most important Chinese Marxist theorists, on his account of service industry labor, where he talks about the living labor is adding value. So yeah, a barista working a register isn't handing a product, but they're adding value. They're Because value is abstract human labor. And working a cash register, just like actually, working an assembly line, those are forms of human labor in the abstract that create value. It is only the expression of equivalence between different sorts of commodities which brings to view the specific character of value creating labor. By actually reducing the different kinds of labor embedded in the different kinds of commodity to their common quality of being human labor in general, right? Because that's ultimately the source of value, is human labor in general, not commodities. Commodities are just where that value has been congealed into something. However, it is not enough to express the specific character of the labor which goes to make up the value of the linen. Human labor power in its fluid state, or human labor, creates value but is not itself value. That's important. Because Marx is going to later talk about the mistake that people make when they put a value on human labor. Human labor is the source of value. It's not value. What it produces, what it does, what it creates is value. It becomes value in its congealed state in objective form. The value of the linen as a congealed mass of human labor can be expressed only as an objectivity, Gegenständlichkeit, a thing which is materially different from the linen itself, and yet common to the linen and all other commodities. The problem is already solved. Right? So you make something, it's produced, you have produced value through your labor. And then this value, like you brought something new into the world, that is an objectivity. You can't see the value with a microscope or on the physical part of the commodity, but objectively speaking, you have made something new, right? And so that bringing something into the world through labor is the objective basis for value. When it is in the value relation with the linen, the coat counts qualitatively as the equal of the linen. It counts as a thing of the same nature because it is a value. So qualitatively, they're both values. Here it is therefore a thing in which value is manifested, or which represents value in its tangible form. Right, so now we're talking about the equivalent, right? The equivalent is also a thing of value. It's a thing in which value is manifested. It represents value in its tangible form. Yet the coat itself, the physical aspect of the commodity, is purely a use value. A coat, as such, has no more expresses value than does the first piece of linen we come across. As by itself, I think here. This proves only that within its value relation to the linen, the coat signifies more than it does outside it, just as some men count for more when inside a gold-braided uniform than they do otherwise. Got a little quip here. So when put in the value relation, there's something added here beyond the use value of the coat, that it's able to symbolize another value. In the production of the coat, human labor power, in the shape of tailoring, has in actual fact been expended. Human labor has therefore been accumulated in the coat. From this point of view, the coat is a bearer of value, although this property never shows through, even when the coat is at its most threadbare. Right? So, because in fact human labor has been used, this coat is a bearer, a träger of value, but you cannot see it just on the coat directly. In its value relation with the linen, the coat counts only under this aspect, counts therefore as embodied value, as the body of value, the Wertkörper, right? So Körper, body, corporeal comes from this word, right? Despite its buttoned up appearance, the linen recognizes it in it a splendid, kindred soul, the soul of value. Nevertheless, the coat cannot represent value towards the linen unless value for the latter simultaneously assumes the form of a coat. Oh, unless value for the latter simultaneously assumes the form of a coat. So in order for the coat to make value appear in it, the linen has to assume the form of a coat in the equivalent. An individual A, for instance, cannot be your majesty to another individual, B, unless majesty in B's eyes assumes the physical shape of A, and moreover, changes facial features, hair, and many other things of every new father of his people. So there's a kind of master-slave relationship here. Hence, in the value relation, in which the coat is the equivalent of the linen, the form of the coat counts as the form of value. Right? So the value form is the coat form here. Which is going to be important when we get to money. Which I don't think will happen today. The value of the commodity linen is therefore expressed by the physical body of the commodity coat, the value of one by the use value of the other. So this is interesting. So the value of the relative form, the linen, is expressed in the use value of the equivalent form. Right? So value appears in the physical body of the other thing. So like what Marx is saying is that like I can't look at the physical body of the linen and find its value. But if it's in a relationship of exchange with another thing, I can see like a coat, I can see the value of linen in terms of the physical body of a coat when it's being traded for that coat, in terms of the use value, right? I think I have like a note about this. Let me check. So like, I have a note that says master-slave dialectic in relation to the majesty part, but it's like 20 linen, that can buy you a coat, right? That's useful, right? Now you're thinking about it as an exchange value. And now you're thinking about it as a relative value towards an equivalent, right? And so when you think, 20 linen, I can get a coat with that, that linen's value is appearing in the form of a different use of a different use value. And value only appears in that way. Does that make sense? I think that might be a way to make this click. What's going on here? As use value, the linen is something palpably different from the coat. As value, it is identical with the coat and therefore looks like the coat. Thus, the value is coat shaped. Thus, the linen acquires a value form different from its natural form. Its existence as value is manifested in its equality with the coat, just as the sheep-like nature of the Christian is shown in his resemblance to the Lamb of God. Marx always in the drama. So like it's like you look at $5 and you're like, that's a meal, that's rent, right? You're seeing those dollars in terms of the use values that they represent, but it's not in the physical dollar, it's in what it can buy. Similarly, you make a bunch of things that you're selling, you're like, that's a meal right there, right? That's what he's talking about. And so you can't see the value of a commodity in that commodity, but you can see it in another commodity that you can get with that commodity. We see then that everything in our analysis of the value of commodities previously told us is repeated by the linen itself as soon as it enters into association with another commodity, the coat. Only it reveals its thoughts in a language with which it alone is familiar, the language of commodities. In order to tell us that labor creates its own value and its abstract quality of being human labor, it says that the coat, insofar as it counts as its equal, i.e., its value consists in the same labor as it does itself. In order to inform us that its sublime objectivity as a value differs from its stiff and starchly existence as a body, it says that value has the appearance of a coat, and therefore that insofar as the linen itself is an object of value, a Wertding, ding is just thing, it and the coat are as like as two peas. Let us note incidentally that the language of commodities also has, apart from Hebrew, plenty of other more or less correct dialects. The German word wert sein, to be worth, for instance, brings out less strikingly than the Roman verb valere, or valere, valoir, that the equating of commodity B with commodity A is the expression of value property to commodity A. Paris vaut bien une messe. Oh, Paris is certainly worth a mass. Henry IV's supposed words on his conversion into Roman Catholicism in 1593. So, the labors being equivalent to it. The value has the appearance of a coat. This is where commodities speak, which is something Marx likes to do in here, because ultimately he's going to argue at the end of this chapter that all this that we're seeing is really just relationships between human beings, but that because of fetishism, it appears as if it's the things themselves doing this stuff. So right now we're at the level of the things themselves appearing like they're doing this stuff. And indeed, they do appear that way. We can't see them any other way under this mode of production. By means of the value relation, therefore, the natural form of commodity B becomes the value form of commodity A. In other words, the physical body of commodity B becomes a mirror for the value of commodity A. So, all right, Lacanians, here it is, mirror stage, right? It's right here in the commodity chapter. Do your thing with it. So, by means of the value relation, right, one thing being related to another, therefore, the natural form of commodity B, its physical form, its use values, becomes the value form of commodity A. So this physical form becomes value form for commodity A. These real actual codes become the expression of the linen. In other words, the physical body of commodity B becomes a mirror for the value of commodity A. So value is something that only appears by mirroring itself in real material things, other real material things that can be acquired by virtue of that thing's value. All right, let's go to footnote 19. We've been all waiting for it. In a certain sense, a man is in the same situation as a commodity, as he neither enters into the world in possession of a mirror, nor as a Fichtean philosopher who can say, I am. A man first sees and recognizes himself in another man. Peter only relates to himself as a man through his relation to another man, Paul, in whom he recognizes his likeness. With this, however, Paul also becomes head to toe in his physical form as Paul, the form of appearance of the species of man for Peter. So, a lot of people think that the master-slave dialectic is like influential on Marx. He doesn't really talk about it, except in this footnote. And when he talks about it, he's not talking about like, oh, proletariat is the slave and like the bourgeoisie is the master. He's saying that for the I to equal itself, the I has to stand in relation to another. It has to be mirrored into another, so that one can recognize oneself as the same as an I, like that other I, and thus as a human being. And he's saying like, and guess what? Commodities have the same thing. So then there's like a master-slave dialectic, but it's the commodities that are engaged in it, not the people here, which is cool. Commodity A, therefore, in entering into a relation with commodity B as an object of value, a verit coop, as the materialization of human labor, makes the use value B into the material through which its own value is expressed. The value of commodity A, thus expressed in the value of commodity B, has the form of relative value. Okay, so now the quantitative determinacy of the relative form of value. So we're going to bring in numbers. Let me look ahead real quick and figure out how far I'm going to be going. About at an hour. There's a lot still before we even get to the end of this part here. Where's the... Sorry. So that's a relative form of value. Then we have this quantitative determinacy. Okay. Then the equivalent form. Let's see. So I think we're going to do the equivalent form next Tuesday, and I'm just going to finish this page here. The quantitative determinacy of the relative value form. Okay. Because I have to teach tomorrow, so I can't be staying up all night doing this. Every commodity whose value is to be expressed is a useful object of a given quantity, for instance, 15 bushels of corn or 100 pounds of coffee. That's something he established in the very first couple paragraphs. Every commodity, every use value is a certain amount of that use value. A given quantity of any commodity contains a definite quantity of human labor, right? It's all products of human labor, so there's a certain amount of labor that went into it. Therefore, the form of value must not only express value in general, but also quantitatively determine value, that is, the magnitude of value. All right, so value is a magnitude. In the value relation of commodity A to commodity B of the linen and the coat, therefore, not only is the commodity type coat equated with the linen in qualitative terms as an object of value as such, so they're equated because they're both valuable, but also a definite quantity of the object of value or equivalent. One coat, for example, is equated with a definite quantity of linen, such as 20 yards. The equation 20 yards of linen equal 1 coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat, presupposes the presence in 1 coat of exactly as much of the substance of value as there is in 20 yards of linen. Implies, therefore, that the quantities which the two commodities are present have cost the same amount of labor, the same quantity of labor time. Right? So to say they're worth the same things, to say they have the same amount of socially necessary labor time put into them. But the labor time necessary for the production of 20 yards of linen or 1 coat varies with every change in the productivity of the weaver or the tailor. The influence of such changes in the relative expression of the magnitude of value must now be investigated more closely. Right, because the labor time varies throughout the day, throughout different conditions. All right. I'm going to have to get some water to get through this real quick again. All right. Let the value of the linen change while the value of the coat remains constant. If the labor time necessary for the production of linen doubled as a result of increasing infertility of flax-growing soil, for instance, its value would also be doubled. Instead of the equation 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, we should have 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats, since 1 coat would only contain half as much labor time as 20 yards of linen. If, on the other hand, the necessary labor time be reduced by 1/2 as a result of improved looms, for instance, the value of the linen will fall by 1/2. Okay, right? So linen's going up in price because it takes twice as much time to make that stuff. Well, now that 20 yards of linen is worth 2 coats because it's rarer, because it's harder to make. But then we introduce improved looms, doubles our doubles our efforts. Now that 20 yards of linen is only half a coat, we got to get twice as much linen to get the coat. The relative value of commodity A, that is its value expressed in commodity B, rises and falls in direct relation to the value of A if the value B remains constant. 2. Let the value of the linen remain constant while the value of the coat changes. If under these circumstances the labor time necessary for the production of the coat is doubled, as a result, for instance, of poor crop of wool, we should have, instead of the 20 yards of linen as 1 coat, 20 yards of linen as half a coat. Right? So basically what he's saying here is that, okay, now if the coat, which is expressing the value, if that's value changes based on the socially necessary labor time, well, now this 20 yards is expressing itself in less coat. Right? But if it sinks by 1/2, right? Coats are more easy to make. 20 yards, 2 coats. Coats got cheaper because easier to make. And so now 20 yards is expressing itself in something different. However, the value in commodity A remains constant. Its relative value is expressed in commodity B, rises and falls in inverse relation to the change of value B. Right? Okay. If we compare the different cases examined under headings 1 and 2, it emerges that the same change in the magnitude of relation of value may arise from entirely opposed causes. Thus, the equation 20 yards of linen equal 1 coat becomes 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats, either because the value of linen has doubled or because the value of coat has fallen by 1/2, right? So if linen and coats, if these prices have changed, these ratios have changed, something has either become cheaper to make or easier to make in less time and the value's fallen, or something's scarce and the value's going up. And it becomes 20 yards of linen equals half a coat, either because the value of linen has fallen by 1/2 or because the value of the coat has doubled. Let the quantities of labor necessary for the production of the linen and the coat vary simultaneously in the same direction and the same proportion. In this case, 20 yards of linen equal 1 coat, as before, whatever change may have taken place in their respective values. So basically saying, like, okay, what happens if the time necessary for making coats doubles, but also the time necessary for making linen doubles. Well, then they just stay the same, 20 to 1. We need to look at a third commodity that hasn't undergone fluctuation to compare, to even see that these things have changed in their value. If the values of all commodities rose or fell simultaneously and in the same proportion, their relative values would remain unaltered. So if everything becomes more like like everything falls in value simultaneously, then the relative values all stay the same. The change in their real values would be manifested by an increase or decrease in the quantity of commodities produced within the labor time. So to see that things are actually less valuable, you couldn't see this if everything fell simultaneously in the relative form. You'd have to actually look at the labor time involved. The labor time necessary for the production, respectively, of the linen and the coat, hence their values may vary simultaneously in the same direction, but to an unequal degree or in opposite directions, and so on. The influence of all possible combinations of this kind on the relative value of a commodity can be worked out simply by applying cases 1, 2, and 3. The real changes in the magnitude of value are neither unequivocally or exhaustively reflected in the relative expression. Or in other words, in the magnitude of the relative value of a commodity may vary, although its value remains constant. Its relative value may remain constant, although the value varies. And finally, simultaneous variations in the magnitude of its value and the relative expression of the magnitude do not by any means have to correspond at all points, right? So things can change in their relative relation to each other. And we have a discussion of the vulgar economists in this pretty long footnote. And I am not familiar as much with them to really go through this. Okay. So we mostly just got through the relative form here today. And so now we got, for the next part, we're going to jump into the equivalent form for next Tuesday at 7 p.m. And so we're going to see here what that other side of things look, right? So first we did the, trading this for something else, right? I'm going to trade this linen that's in the relative form for the equivalent, the coat. And then that linen's going to express its value in a certain amount of coat. We're going to look at that side of the equivalent form for the next discussion. And then, there'll be a discussion of the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle here too, which has a discussion of value. There's a theory of value in Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics. Then we're going to look at the value form as a whole. Then we'll get to this expanded form of value, the expanded relative form, the particular equivalent form, the defects of the expanded form, and then finally the general form of value, which will get inverted into finally money. So this, just kind of judging by how this is going, I think we're going to spend a little bit longer on this section. And so we'll see, where this ends up going as a project. But, it's going to be a slow read of Capital, but sometimes that's what you got to do. But I've got to go teach in the morning. So this has been the Dialectics Hour. And I just wanted to say the semester is almost over. Got 2 more weeks left and then grading. And then I'll be able to be making a bunch more content after that time. So stay tuned for the next episode, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, here on the YouTube channel, Dialectics Hour. Until then,